Okay, welcome everyone to this week's OMR Architecture Meeting. We have 4 items on the agenda today. I need to deviate a little bit from the ordering in the that's already been posted, just to accommodate some schedules. So the first one that we're going to be talking about today is a compiler request. So it's issue number 4299. This is an issue to address the namings of the architecture directories in OMR. So right now, if you're familiar with those, we use sort of a shorthand notation for various architectures like X, P, Z, Z, and ARM, AR64, that kind of thing. In discussions with some of the people wanting to contribute RISC-V code, it became clear that the choices of those names isn't necessarily standard, and it's actually influencing the choice that others want to give to directory names as well. So we decided that what we'd like to try to do is to rename those to more common names, such as x86, Power, Z, if Z is appropriate, ARM, AR64, and RISC-V for RISC-V. So it's really being consistent, and it's really being fair across the board. So there was a bit of discussion in 4299 already. I don't think I heard any real objections to the proposal. I think the one outstanding one one open issue is what to do with the Power directory. There were a couple of different choices there, and personally, I like to go with Power because it is the most correct thing to say. But PPC tends to be the more what everyone will actually understand. But I personally prefer Power. Others have expressed interest in that as well. So anyways, I'll just stop there for a moment. And well, actually, let me just say that any work that we do here is going to have an impact on downstream projects, because the naming of those directories is important for the way that the extensible classes actually work. So, and unfortunately, this isn't something that we may be able to do in stages, unless it's really ugly. Which I don't really want to do either. So it may be an unfortunate thing that we have a momentary breakage downstream while the renamings occur. So I'll pause there if there's any discussion that anyone wants to have on this.
Well, I think we're going to have to consult with the downstream projects on when exactly we're going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ideally, they should agree to the same naming scheme. So like OpenJ9 has directories with these names, for example. We would need them to adopt these names, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's more of a consumption of OMR, like a requirement from the consumption of OMR, right? It's to make the extensible classes work in OpenJ9 as well. So would throw an issue up out there as well to maybe as an FYI that this kind of a change is coming, but I think the next step in OMR at least is to follow it up with a pull request so that there is a place where that discussion can happen and can see what the changes are. This is tied in a little bit to the release candidate that we want to do. I'm not planning on, in terms of whether or not we wanted to do this for this release or wait for the next one. My feeling is to wait for the next one, just based on how close we are to October the 4th right now.
You know, I suspect we're going to have a bit of adjustment in the schedule to allow to try and find a quieter time to do the change.
Okay. All right, okay, so the next step there is a pull request in OMR and probably an issue in OpenJ9 to at least as an FYI that there's some changes that are going to be needed to the compiler. Okay, let's move on to the next one. 4351. Leo, do you want to take that one? I'm all over.
Sure.
Or imulover? What is it?
I think it's I'm all over, but I'm open to interpretation. So there is this legacy opcode was discovered called I'm all over, and as far as I can tell from the tiny bit of code that's written in the compiler to support it, it's only in the power code gen that there's an evaluator for it. And one comment, it seems to be essentially trying to do what we would now use an overflow check for. So it tries to do a multiplication and sees if it overflows. All the code generators right now, except Power, have it as an unimplemented op evaluator. Looking at the code for the Power code generator, I think that it's not handling every case and things could break horribly because it tries to detect whether the children are signed or unsigned, but it doesn't cover every case. And then unsigned opcodes some of them are being deprecated. So there's still a lot of reason to suggest it's not actually active. And in no downstream project that I've looked at is it being used. So I propose that we just remove the opcode and any uses of it, and because it's not providing any value clearly. Are there any objections to this, or thoughts or feedback?
No, I posted one comment in the item, basically saying that the overflow check and unsigned overflow check opcodes are relatively new in the scheme of the compiler technology that we're looking at, and that that certainly predates that scheme. So if it's not used, it should be removed to normalize the IR onto the check version of the opcodes.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so this is downstream breakage as well, right?
Removing breakage, yes, for anyone that messes around with the opcode table.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion to have on that? I don't think that there's any objection to removing that. That's for sure. So, okay. And then the next IL item that we have is the requirement to rename the various ternary family of opcodes to something that is more that's a little bit less ambiguous. So, and the request was to rename it to a select family of opcodes. This problem came about because of, so first of all, this issue has been open for at least a couple of years now, and it came about from some people working in the code and the confusion around the semantics of the ternary IL opcode. Part of that is the fault of the project in that we don't actually have great documentation, explicit documentation on the semantics of these various opcodes. But as a result of that, people were bringing in some of their preconceived conceptions about how those opcodes were supposed to behave. So, for example, in the case of the ternary opcode, the semantics actually are that all the children are evaluated regardless of which of the alternatives is actually chosen, which is different than the semantics of perhaps a ternary operator in C, for example. So the proposal, you can read through the various discussions and the comments and things like that, rooted at issue 681. The proposal there is to simply rename the family to select. Now, this I think that the family has kind of grown since 2017, 2016, when this was first proposed. So this now does include ternary opcodes for different data types, plus a vector opcode as well. So I guess there's two things that I'd like to put out there. One is to actually do the rename, and then the second is to find a place to actually add some documentation for that, for the semantics of that opcode. The general problem of documenting our IL still needs to get solved, but I'd like to find, as part of this PR at least, to find some place to hang at least a description of what the semantics of the select opcodes are going to be, just so that there is something there, and we're not making it as ambiguous. So, any discussion on that? No? So unlike the previous two topics that we just discussed, I think that we can actually get away with not breaking any downstream projects by renaming things, because I think that we can stage things by simply creating an alias to, because it's really just an entry, an enumeration that we're creating. We can create a select opcode that aliases to the corresponding ternary opcode, add it in OMR, make the change downstream, come back to OMR and make the change. So I think that we can get away with not breaking things. Yay. Okay, so I'll add a comment into that issue if there's no other discussion to let there is a developer that is interested in working on this, so I'm going to just let him know what we've decided here, so that he can do the right thing going forward. He's probably going to need a little bit of help defining the semantics of it, obviously, because I don't think if we collectively put our heads together here, we'd have a hard time coming up with it. So. Okay. All right. Okay. So with that out of the way, next topic on the agenda is the first release candidate for OMR. So I'll turn it over to Mark Studley to talk.
Yeah, okay. Not a whole lot to, I guess, discuss here. So I created an issue which I think is linked in the agenda, and it's sitting in front of us on the WebEx there, which is a place for us to collect work that needs to get done ahead of the October 4th release. I think the most important decision that we have to make is what commit are we going to use as the basis for our release. And given that nobody that I'm aware of has come forward with any PRs or issues that we absolutely think must be fixed before we would do a 0.1 release, which isn't surprising given that the 0.1 release is really just a line in the sand kind of release to get one out the door, then we're left with kind of an arbitrary choice. And I think the only one, there has been one suggestion made by, I think, Dibiendu earlier, which was pick the commit that OpenJ9 is going to use for its release. Now, OpenJ9 has actually already split created their release branch for their current release. And so we could just pick the equivalent commit and say that's the commit that we're going to turn into our 0.1 release. Another arbitrary choice would be to just pick one someday and say that's the one that it's going to be. So does anyone have any votes for what we should do? Does anyone care?
I mean, I don't think we're waiting for any features, right? Like we don't want to have, any API changes or directory renames or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, so we're not on the cusp of creating a stable API for any of the components right now. So it's not like it's an urgently needed release for anybody. The components that have stable APIs have stable APIs. The components that don't have stable APIs are probably going to continue to have unstable APIs for the time being.
We need to put a markdown doc in the repository with that statement in it.
Yeah.
That's in the release.
Yep, that's one of the other topics, and one of the other issues is creating kind of release notes for the release to describe, what the state of the world is. Most of these things were actually written down in the release plan that was approved approved without any comments through the Eclipse process. No opinions? All right. So given that, I would probably just pick the one that OpenJ9 picked, because then we can at least say that we have a consumer of that release, even if they didn't consume it consciously. And they don't have any, we don't have any agreement with the OpenJ9 project to continue to have them pick up releases, but I think it's a reasonable place for us to start, given that we don't have any, critical need to set a release on a particular commit.
Has OpenJ9 had to merge any changes into their OpenJ9 OMR branch?
Good question. Don't know.
Because if we're trying to tag the same commit, that'll throw that story off.
Yeah, well, I think it's fine for OpenJ9 to have added some fixes in at the, or to have tacked other things in, but we can call it the base. It won't be perfect. You're right if that's the case. Did you know if any OMR issues have been tacked into that branch yet, Dan?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can find out fairly quickly if you give me a minute.
Great.
The head of their .17 release branch is showing a commit from the 20th of September, so it's a week old. That looks like it's just normal history, so it doesn't look like a cherry pick.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay, in that case, I guess it's just kind of, there's a few pieces of work that then have to flow downstream from doing that, and I think most of them are things that committers can do. They're not things that leads have to do, although some of them might be. I guess we also have to decide if we want to create a GitHub release that's associated with this. I had the notion of at least creating a libgit builder TGZ, like the thing that wraps up the library plus the include directories plus the code samples with a README, which kind of the release thing that I created for Git Builder back in the days when we didn't have an open source compiler that it was based upon, as kind of a one binary thing that we could produce as part of an OMR release. So I'll, since that's my idea, I'll obviously volunteer to do it, unless someone thinks it's a really bad idea. Otherwise, I'm imagining that this is just a source code release, with libgit builder being the one binary produced out of this process. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll take care of that. Does anyone have any feelings on whether we should do a GitHub release? I think it would be a good thing for us to do.
I don't see any reason why we would.
Right. So good answer. I like that answer. However, we're now collecting a bunch of things that we need to do ahead of October 4th. I think so the two other questions that I asked in the issue were around whether there were any issues that people think we need to address. I think the answer to that is no. There is also another question of, is there any additional testing that we can or should perform for the release ahead of doing a release? We have vanishing small amount of time to do that, and if we're choosing this based on an OpenJ9 commit, I'm not sure what value that additional testing would provide unless it just happened to work.
Is there any testing that we're not running?
Yes, exactly. That's the main challenge that I have with the whole, like, what else would we do? I think in future, it would make sense for some of the prototype projects that we've got, right? So all of those Git Builder pilots and the SOM, for example, if we can create a milestone build earlier than 1 week before we're doing the release, I think it would be valuable for having those asking those projects if they have the time to run the project, like the Lua one could run Lua tests on it to make sure nothing broke. We can do small talk tests on the SOM one, that kind of thing. And if anybody has issues, they can report them back and we can tag them to the release and try to get them fixed. But I think for this one, I'm not sure that there's, sorry, go ahead.
I was just, Shelley here, sorry, I also wanted to say that though I don't think I'll be ready to do it for this release, I have the intention of taking some measurements on each release. There are some GC performance tests that I want to get back up and running that I want to at least be taking points of, and also the code coverage. So we had originally run code coverage on OMR tests. I know from the JIT perspective that isn't very important, but I still would like to be able to measure that as we go forward with the releases. So having said that, I don't have that stuff ready for this release, but I will be putting those things in place over the next little while.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Shelley, for that. I think that would be a great addition to things. I'll just take quick notes here to make sure I don't forget anything. Lower the probability that I'll forget something. All right. Does anybody want to volunteer to help set up the GitHub release, assuming that it's only committerhood that's required to do that? Okay. Thank you, Daryl. Set up GitHub release. Mark volunteered to do the Git builder thing. All right. We need to create the release branch and tag the current candidate commit. I guess I can take that.
What is the significance of the October 4th date? Is that we have to have all the things in our checklist done by that date? Or,
so,
like, for example, the release?
Yeah,
do we
so
create it now?
in the release plan, we listed October 4th as the target date for doing the release. So is it critical that we meet that date? No.
No, I'm not worried about that.
Just kind of, that's what we're aiming for. I didn't want it to be too far out because I didn't want us to dilly-dally getting to it, but there's nothing driving October 4th.
But yeah, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking because if we get things done, if the release becomes available before October 4th, that's
we
fine.
could release it early.
It's not like it has to suddenly appear.
Yes. Agreed. I love the magical world you live in, where things happen early.
Well, we've already got the commit though, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's more if we're worried about the testing coverage. I mean, OpenJ9 is running up to their release, and their GA date I think is like the 18th, with like milestone 2 on the 9th. So and it may be that a little slippage beyond the 4th may allow them to close out more of their, like there's a large number of items open against that release target right now for OpenJ9. It's not clear how many of those may have an OMR component to them. So if they're running more testing than any other testing, at least keeping an eye on how many things they find in OMR, and if there are things there that they want to fix, it may make sense to put them into the release. Like if they're going to be picking fixes. I
see your point. All right, but that still implies that we're picking a commit from September 29th or whatever that OpenJ9 currently picked, and then cherry picking fixes that they need into that branch.
Yeah.
All right, let me take off my OpenJ9 hat. Since Dan's on the call, Dan, do you think that would make things any more easy or any easier on the OpenJ9 project, or would?
Apologies, I got distracted by something else. What was the question?
So Andrew was suggesting that in the context of our discussion around whether or not we have to hit the October 4th release date target, he was mentioning that OpenJ9 has a later release date, and they may, through the course of OpenJ9 testing, find additional OMR issues that they require to fix before the OpenJ9 release, the next OpenJ9 release. And so he was suggesting that maybe we could still provide those fixes as part of the OMR release, which would mean us cherry picking those fixes for OMR onto our release branch, which then OpenJ9 could just consume the release branch. However, knowing right now that OpenJ9 isn't actually consuming our release branch, they're just doing stuff they're just pulling stuff from master. So anyway.
I mean, the other option.
Yeah, I think our process so far has been that as long as we can get the change we need into OMR master, we're happy to pull it into our release branch, into the OpenJ9 release branch. I'm not sure adding the extra release branch dependencies it feels like an extra complication in our process. If that lines up completely and cleanly for all the things we need, great. I'm happy to do that, but I'd hate to impose extra cost on the OMR project or on us to get there.
I think the only imposition on us right now is that it's not the date that we have listed in our release plan, and so.
The other alternative.
And we would be cherry picking something into that branch.
Yeah, the other alternative could be like this is .1, right? So .11, we know that there are any significant issues that should be fixed.
Yeah, okay, we could tag a .11.
Well, if you don't want to slip the fourth date,
yeah, no,
like you're going to get more coverage out of the OpenJ9 test. In terms of at least the compiler component, there would be there's a fair amount of stuff in OMR that will get much more exercised in OpenJ9. Like it will.
Why don't we just do that then? Because I don't think we don't need to go, as I understand it, I'll have to verify this with Eclipse, but we don't have to go through another release plan to do a .1 release. So if there's additional fixes that it makes sense to go on to our .1 release, we'll put them on there, just like we would for any other problem report that got, I guess, in principle, if it was serious enough. And we can just cherry pick it into that and let people know that we've done that. So
well, maybe that's not a bad precedent to set, right? Like if we, just zooming out a little bit, if we have a release pattern for OMR, right, it's conceivably likely that at least some subset of derivative projects may want to line up with those releases.
Yep.
The amount of testing of some of the areas of the infrastructure in OMR is likely to be higher in some of those derivative projects because they'll hammer on different parts of the framework.
Yep.
They may find other issues. They may require those to be fixed for their particular release, or they'll do a revision release if they find them, bundling them into a fix pack essentially on the end of it, for want of a better word, a hot fix, whatever you want to call it, so that all of the projects could pick that up at some point a bit later, right, once everybody's finished their testing and gone out and, anything that needed fixing is being fixed, right?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to get people to move to a kind of milestone, like check an early milestone that's not available for this particular release, but if we could have people do testing on an early milestone. That's not going to work for everything, but ideally we'd have them do testing on a milestone, reporting bugs against that, and then we'd stabilize that milestone build into the release. But I don't have a serious problem with adding hot fixes as they become identified for the release. Does anybody else think that's a bad idea or a good idea?
But how are we ensuring the stability of the release itself, right? Like if we are just going to merge things in the last minute, right? I'm just coming from my world of things that I'm asking, right? Like, because, okay, it could be very few, then it's fine, but if it is going to be because playing with the release itself is like, I don't know, for somebody coming from a product side.
Right. Well, the release doesn't go away. We'd just be adding another fix on top of the existing release, right? So, but I understand the issue. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm not sure we have to figure it out for this release, though.
Yeah, well, I think that while we're in the 0.x phase, we can experiment.
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
because especially initially, I suspect that you could probably spend a long time just finding bugs in the existing state of the code. So we can experiment and then settle on something.
And a lot of these things will depend on what our release cadence ends up being, which we haven't discussed, and I don't want to discuss as part of this. I just want to get this release out the door, and then we can start discussing topics of how often are we going to do this, which will impact how costly it is and how dangerous it is for people to put fixes onto that release branch afterwards. And technically, we only have one official, actually, that's not true. We have more than one consumer of this tech. But that other consumer is Dibiendo, who's the one who asked us to base on the same commit that OpenG9 is using. So I won't put words in his mouth, but I think he would be in favor of us doing what we're talking about here. So okay, so let's keep the October 4th date just as we'll keep our line in the sand. We'll deliver to that, and if OpenG9 identifies subsequent OMR fixes that it needs for its release, we can ask them to let us know about that. And then we can consider doing a hotfix or whatever we want to call it on our release. Agreed?
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone seems to be nodding in the room. Great. Okay. And just put a note to that to myself. Okay. Release. Okay, we need someone to write up release notes.
Sounds like everything since we've
No. Absolutely not. That's what the IP log's for. No, I'm just joking. All right, I'll take a crack at writing up release notes, and maybe I'll ask some people to help with parts of that. But I don't intend to spend a lot of time on it.
What exactly is supposed to go in the release notes?
It's information about the release, right? It's
okay.
If somebody wants to know what's in the release, they should go to the release notes, and it should describe faithfully what's in there, which I think, again, most of that's probably described already in the release plan that we put together. So I'm intending to substantially lift from that document.
Code.
Thanks.
It's accurate. It's
lots and
not
lots
so helpful.
of stuff.
I think we
Good stuff.
borrow from OpenG9 here, later template for the release.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Go to GitHub. They have a pretty standard-looking, consistent release.
Be happy to learn from our betters. My name here, Mark 2. Together. Okay, let's see what else is here. Testing, no. Release branch covered. Oh, release branch and tag. Do you want to do the release branch and tag? Sure. Along with the GitHub release? Write this down. Release branch and tag.
Can I do that as a committer, or do you have to be a?
I believe you can do it as a committer because that's just a Git thing.
Just a branch.
You're just creating a branch in the actual OMR
Okay, I thought there
repo
was
and then
some
tagging it.
piece of the workflow that you needed to be a project lead for.
All right, if you run into trouble,
I know.
poke me and I'll do the needful. I'm creating that. I'm doing that. He's doing that. Okay, that's all from my list.
Cool.
Anything else anyone thinks we should be doing for this release that we haven't already talked about? Okay.
I have a question about the next release, though.
Can we just get this one out the door? Jeez.
Well, no, it's sort of a joke. I'm just thinking, so going forward, how are we going to be, I guess, planning and talking about the next, the subsequent releases? Is just create an issue in GitHub and we just land stuff there?
I mean, this one because it was kind of, 3 years into the project. It didn't make sense to create a document to plan all the things that we were going to do starting 3 years ago. Going forwards, I think it makes a little more sense to be a little more proactive in talking about what we think is going to happen for the next release. One part of which is deciding when the next release is likely to be or should be. Like, are we going to do time-boxed releases? Are we going to do feature-based releases? Are we going to, I don't know, make them up as we go along?
Very popular choice.
Yeah, I know. October 7th.
Yesterday.
Had a whole weekend worth of content to deliver. Anyway, so yeah, so those kinds of issues I think we should start discussing as soon as we get this one out the door. Right. So I think creating an issue for the next release planning, which we should start off with some of these other topics. I mean, we can come back to this meeting in a couple of weeks since we'll have done the release by then, and we can kick off that discussion, I guess. Sound good?
Okay.
Okay.
So will there be something like a tag of stable against the release or something?
Yep.
Or how?
Yeah, the idea is to create a release branch in case we have to put additional fixes on it, and then we'll also tag the commits on that branch as for the release. And then those will be the ones that are documented in the GitHub release and in our release notes and so on.
Okay. Any more discussion on the OMR release? Nope. Okay. That is the last topic on the agenda for this week. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll talk again in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Thanks, bye.